All right, good morning. All right, we're going to talk about deepfakes. I think you've heard about how AI is helping things, but it's also hurting things. And today we are in this very unique situation where we're sort of using AI on both sides, the good and the bad. You've heard about deepfakes, but let's start with this little introduction video.
Let's play a game. I'm going to show you two videos. One is real, one is altered by AI. Can you spot the deep fake? Prime Minister Justin Trudeau recommended one of these books. Which one?
The book that I got excited about reading through. It's called This Can't Be Happening in MacDonald Hall. It's called How the Prime Minister Stole Freedom.
Yeah, it was the last one. The Prime Minister never said that. Okay, round two.
If you can see, I hope to finish this talk show one day.
Will the fake Morgan Freeman please stand up?
I am not Morgan Freeman, and what you see is not real.
How about these videos of Florida Governor Ron DeSantis? Did the presidential hopeful say this
I'm the only one that could possibly compete with Donald Trump.
or this?
I took some very bad advice. I did some very bad things.
The last one is fake, made to make you think that DeSantis was dropping out of the race. Look at the mouth, out of sync to the voice.
I never should have challenged President Trump.
One giveaway to a deepfake. For now. From Hollywood to Washington to Ottawa, deepfakes are confusing reality.
With AI, fraudsters can take 3-second recording of your voice. I've watched one of me on a couple of things. I said, when the hell did I say that?
So what are deepfakes? So deepfakes, they're synthetic media that are made to look real, and they're created by these very advanced techniques called GANs. GANs are generative adversarial networks. These are neural nets that can manipulate images, videos, and voices that make it look real, but they're not really real. How does it really work? Just to give you a quick primer on that. So these GANs are really deep learning architectures. They are neural nets, and so you take two neural nets and you train them to sort of compete against each other, and then you create new data from the existing data set. So for instance, you can generate new images from a data set of images, or new audio from a data set of audio. It could be music. That's essentially how that works. But the problem is that today, outside of just sort of using this for creative purposes, you're creating a massive issue where you're losing the aspect of authenticity. Let's look at this example. This happened a few years ago. There was a situation where in a Zoom call, a CFO of a Singaporean organization got fooled into believing that the CEO, who was on the call, on the video call, was doing this private transaction, which was an urgent transaction, and he was asked to wire $25 million in this special account. And there were other members in that Zoom call as well. They were all fake. And he did the wire, and they lost $25 million. So he saw the person, he heard the person, there was no person. Then this was just this year. So there was this story that was broken by Washington Post originally, where someone impersonated Marco Rubio, created a fake Signal account, inserted various Signal chats, and used audio conversations to basically extract information. Now you'd think, the US government has sophisticated technology, but this got undetected for 8 months for Secretary of State. That's how good it was. And we also got a little news bite out of that. I mean, the National Enquirer did a little post, and I got my fix of actually being talked about in a tabloid eventually. So I was pretty happy about that. So when we talk about real versus fake, you need to understand that the problem runs very deep. When it comes to deepfakes, the conversation really centers around separating real from fake. But the deeper question is, how do we truly even understand what real even is? I'll explain. So let's take camera for an example. When you look through a viewfinder, what you see is what you expect to see out there. Light, colors, textures. What you're seeing, you also expect to be out there. And you think of our eyes to be like a camera's viewfinder, but it's not. What you see is not what's out there, it's what your brain expects you to see. It's the reality that's constructed by the brain. It's like a production studio. Let's take a few examples. Here's a checker shadow illusion problem, which is quite common. So you see two boxes, A and B, and they're both different colors, right? But when I remove the surrounding context, you actually see that they're the same color. But your brain is changing that reality real time for you because it expects you to see as a different color because it's a checkerboard. The same's true for color. I mean, color is simply an interpretation of the brain. There's no color out there. I mean, this white chair and the red chair, I mean, these colors that you see, those are not physical properties of matter. They don't really exist as you think they do. They're just, how your brain interprets that wavelength of light that's reflecting from that object. And I'm not sure if you know this or not, but the taste and smell are more or less the same thing. I mean, that taste of chocolate and the smell of coffee that you'll love to grow so much, it's not necessarily real as you think it is. It's just an interpretation. It's a chemical interpretation of the brain that allows you to make reality more meaningful and interesting for you. Let's take this example. There's a rotating mask. It's hollow on one side, which is concave. But when the hollow side appears, your brain forces you to see as not hollow. Now, here's the funny thing. I just told you what's going on, but you still can't see it. This is exactly a situation where a brain which is inherently wired to construct reality, and as a result, it is totally susceptible to manipulation. So what we think of as real is often just an interpretation. It's not an absolute truth. And so when you talk about deepfakes, it isn't just about identifying fabrications. It's about understanding the essence of authenticity. So it's a much, much harder, much bigger problem than most understand. And our minds grapple with this every day, even with the reality that we expect it to be real. And so now you're in a situation, you're looking at a simulated reality. It's a big problem. Well, let's get into the deepfakes a little bit on the technical side. So what are the current approaches to detecting deepfakes? So largely, there are three different approaches. You're looking at certain artifacts. You're looking at aspects of transitions, hairline, eyes, like you saw in that video where, DeSantis was speaking, and there was a little, the lips were a little off. So you sort of see those things and you say, oh, it doesn't really feel right. And then you can look for some biometric inconsistencies, certain symmetry in voices, certain sort of, audio artifacts. And then you can look for certain biomarkers. So when you create a deepfake, you lose a certain set of biomarkers that are typically present in the natural voice. But when you create a synthetic segment, you're losing those. So typically, the deepfake detectors that exist today do exactly that. So it's looking for these inconsistencies, it's looking at these flaws, and it's looking at these sort of missing biomarkers. And when it finds those flaws or it doesn't find the biomarkers in the biomarker detection case, it determines the segments to be fake. And how does it do that? It uses these models, they're called CNN, these are convolutional neural network models, and they're trained on large data sets of real versus synthetic. And so initially, if you've heard about sort of voice biometrics, that was rage of the day. It's now sort of slowly being sort of phased out because it doesn't work anymore, where you would call and, the bank or the company that you're calling will identify you from your voice, and you don't have to put a PIN in, so PIN replacement technologies. And so these were the models that were designed to do that. These were the models that were designed to do speaker verification. and then they were repurposed to detect deepfakes. And largely, what they do is they take in spectrograms, which are visual representations of audio frequencies, and then it extracts the features and then use classifiers to sort of classify what's real versus fake. And this approach has worked pretty well for the last, I would say, 5 to 7 years, up until recently. So what's happened in the last 18 months or so, which is something that is not truly public knowledge because it's not advertised as such, is the GANs, the generative adversarial models, which create the deepfakes, have figured all of this out. The inconsistencies have gone away. They've gotten so better at this that they can actually synthesize the biomarkers and insert the biomarkers in just the right spots. So if you're looking for the biomarkers, you're going to find them. The detection technologies that are present today from the leading companies out there are outdated and they don't work. So why do you not hear about that? Well, because you don't want a mass panic and hysteria. That's why you're not hearing about those things. But they don't work. You could literally take 3 to 5 seconds of audio from a social media feed, create deepfakes using that, and fool somebody who's known that person their entire life. I mean, our ears are completely, unequipped to tackle that. But now you also have these tools that fail. It's a big problem. So what do we do? What do we do? Where do we go from here? We got to do a full-on reset. We got to go back to the drawing board. We have to rethink this problem. And the detection must involve and focus on more human elements, look at deeper patterns, which are inconsistent but are not invisible to these sophisticated models. Here's one approach. It uses behavioral mapping. See, the human speech carries behavioral patterns like stress, cognitive load, intent. Those are very, very hard to fool. So you can create a deepfake that sounds very real because you're getting the tone and the timbre and the pitch right, but you cannot replicate the behavioral pattern. That's very intrinsic to who that person is. And it's also very unique to who that person is. So you can now create these models that can tap into those things. It can look at what are the specific aspects that are unique to a person. Like, for example, everyone expresses anger differently. It's just a simple example. You'd expect that when you're angry, you're going to talk faster, talk louder, but that's not always the case. Some people talk slower, some people talk less, some people have larger pauses. Those are signatures for that person. So if you can extract those signatures real time and then look for variances and subtle nuances which tell you that something's off, you can detect that if it's fake. These are technologies now that are available that allow you to sort of, instead of focusing just on the spectral anomalies, just stitching artifacts, the audio artifact detection aspects, you can go deeper. You can get into the human behavior. You can get into the special expression that's unique to that person. These inconsistent stress patterns and missing emotional dynamics and, the cognitive load cues that can allow you to identify these deepfakes. So this currently still works. It's not necessarily something that, you can fool easily. But the detection is now becoming as generative as generation itself. And that's hilarious, right? So certainly you use generative models to create deepfakes, but now you're using generative models to detect deepfakes. And we still haven't figured out what the reality is to begin with. So it's going to get really interesting. I mean, at some point, there will be a fusion of language understanding with maybe voice synthesis. I mean, you could sort of think of this as GPT plus Tektron, combining that, put it on steroids. What happens then? We don't really know. But currently, it's an armed race. It is getting to a point where we are looking at a situation where it might be hard to do business unless you are standing in person or you get touch and poke the person. That's kind of where we're at today. Thank you.